Welcome back to the channel. For those of you who missed the last community poll, I've posted a new one ahead of uploading this video. As per the previous poll, we'll be playing Reavers Harmony Megamod. This mod advertises itself as difficult enough to rival even the difficulty-oriented ones, at least when played on Superhuman, so this is going to be fun. There are a bunch of fun changes here. If you have the time and want something that builds upon the original XCOM experience, I'd highly recommend playing this mod. It took me about 100 hours to play through it, however, as with every one of these videos, I played the entire game Let's Play style. Especially if you play on difficulty lower than Superhuman, you should be able to get through this in close to half the time. Finally, all of the soldiers have names given by people in my Discord. There's a link in the description, and more info at the end of the video if you're curious. Now let's get into it. So what actually makes Superhuman so difficult in this mod? To start, the stats of many items and units change across difficulties. This includes your aircraft and armor, and the alien's aircraft and overall stats. As for your stuff, I didn't look too far into the aircraft nerfs. I just played the game with what I was given and figured out how to make it work. The armor, however, was much easier to access. In the custom battle options allowed by OpenXcom, I was able to add armor to the soldiers in the craft, and each had 3 variations. At a glance, you can see the armor drops by roughly 20 every difficulty increase. Veteran and below will have access to the mid-tier, and beginner will have the best. As for the aliens themselves, I have all of the stats of the basic alien infantry. To start, here is the sectoid. It has an impressive number of time units, however, most of the other stats are as you would expect. It does have 12 more health than usual, but this is no issue with the new arsenal I will be discussing shortly. Next up, we have floaters. Like the sectoid, most of these stats are about the same, however, there are a few notable changes. Firstly, the time units are much higher, second, the reactions are significantly lower, and third, the health has more than doubled. The vanilla floater has between 35 and 45 health depending on rank. The soldiers from this mod have 90 health, so it only gets worse from here. The Snake Man is about the same as the floater. However, it does only have 70 time units. These two aliens are what I would consider to be the mid-game aliens, as their stats are significantly more impressive than the standard sectoid. The sectoid, however, does have its own mid-game form. Once in the mid-game, you can encounter armored sectoids. These aliens have 40 or more armor on all sides. Keep this in mind when I showcase the new human arsenal, as it makes much of it obsolete. Finally, let us take a look at the mutons and ethereals. For reference, here is a screenshot of a vanilla muton side by side with the modded one. While reactions were nerfed, every other stat is either untouched or significantly buffed. Most notably, the muton now has 180 health, taking the bar off the side of the screen. The old muton now has the same health as the modded Snake Man. As for ethereals, they are a bit different. This mod adds a stat called Psionic energy, and these are the first soldier class aliens to have access to it. Additionally, they have less health than vanilla and instead have a large amount of armor. They have a ton of time units, though fairly average stats otherwise, especially when compared to the rest of these aliens. Finally, let's talk about the new human arsenal. I will class these weapons into melee, pistol, primary, and specialist weapons. However, to start, I should explain how to read the UFOpedia entries. Here is the autocannon. Most of this is familiar, however, the first change I will draw your attention to is the inclusion of ammo alongside ammo types. In this case, the autocannon has been buffed to have 24 rounds in each magazine. Next, under the item icon, you can see its weight. There are 2 values here. The first is the unloaded weapon weight, and the second is the loaded weapon weight. The final difference is under shot type. Accuracy and time units are unchanged. To fire the weapon, the soldier will consume the percentage of time units under TU cost, and the percentage chance of hitting will be based on the soldier's firing stat multiplied by the accuracy shown in the column. The names, however, have some extra info after them. Looking at the snapshot option, there is 2x in brackets followed by the slash and a whole number. This is not a formula. Instead, it is 2 different pieces of information. In the brackets is how many shots will be fired from the gun when performing this shot type, and the second number is the optimal range of the attack. When attacking outside this range, you will start to lose accuracy and eventually it will hit 0. Additionally, if you do not have line of sight to your target, your accuracy will be further reduced to only 66% of what it normally would be. Additionally, I will mention that melee weapons function differently from ranged weapons. This is the combat knife, and there are 2 things you should notice. First, if the weapon has a flat time unit cost to use, rather than a percentage. And second, this weapon has a formula for bonus damage based off of the soldier's stats. This formula is under the shot type, and in the case of the knife, it is based on strength, reactions, and melee accuracy. Now let's get to these weapons. Firstly, the pistols. There are two classes of pistol, the standard and auto. Both are one-handed weapons and extremely useful in their dedicated role. Next, we have the primary weapons. Here we have the rifle and the shotgun. The rifle has high time unit costs relative to most other weapons, though it does have the best range stat of all of them. In my experience, it was always outclassed by the pistol due to high time unit costs. The shotgun, on the other hand, has the highest damage potential of any of the non-specialist weapons. Looking at the ammo damage stats, it fires 9 pellets that do 15 damage each. Onto specialist weapons, we have 4. The two cannons, like the pistols, are good in their dedicated roles. The heavy cannon in particular fills the role the rifle is aiming for better than the rifle itself, so I used it in cases where I wanted precise damage. The rocket launcher is still a rocket launcher, however, the grenade launcher in my experience was generally worse than just carrying around the grenades yourself. It may have better range, but if you wanted a dedicated soldier for grenades, you can always just pick someone strong. Finally, we have the melee weapons. The Super Stun Lance must be manufactured and has a massive damage bonus based on melee accuracy, and the other two are about what you would expect. The knife in particular I put on every soldier since it had a weight of 1 and could be used in tight spots to avoid reaction shots. With all of the weapons shown, I can briefly discuss my strategy with them. Using the machine gun while obscured by smoke is an extremely effective strategy. The cannons are useful whenever someone can actually carry them, though they do have diminishing returns the more you bring along, and the pistols are extremely powerful when paired. Because of this, I had 3 main roles. The people who were weak or good at close range got to dual-wield pistols, one of each type. Most of the people who were good at close range fighting and strong also got a shotgun, though I did use shotguns and machine guns for close range fights where you were obscured by smoke. Finally, when someone was strong, they got one of the cannons. The less accurate got the autocannon, and the more accurate got the heavy cannon. Now that all of that is out of the way, let's get into the game. To start out, I had to pick a base location. For this run, I placed my starter base in Asia. At this point, I wasn't sure what radar facilities would become available, however I assumed that I would eventually be able to use the largest radar ring. With this massive ring, I would be able to cover the entirety of Asia and most of Europe. Next, I had to decide on the starter base facilities. In this mod, you don't start with an alien containment researched, so I'll need to leave space for that in my plans. However, there are a bunch of extra changes. The first major change is facility capacities. Living quarters, labs, and workshops now have half of the capacity that they normally would. Additionally, there are 2x2 versions of most facilities now. The radar in particular no longer has a large radar, you instead need to build the larger facility. For the other facilities that have a larger version, it has the equivalent stats of 5 for the space of 4. This is extremely useful, and something I'll be using on the specialized bases that we are now somewhat required to build. With these 2x2 facilities, the optimal base design will only support 4 of them. At our home base, we will only get away with 3 due to hangar placement, but in future bases, you can forego the third hangar and place a large facility under its location. This means that most bases will have the same 3 facilities that I plan on placing at our home base, plus the specialized facility. Now to start out this mod, you have a ton of money. Not only do you have 7 million to start, there is an additional 8 million in valuables that you can sell. At our home base, I plan on placing a large radar, large living quarters, and a large general stores. To do this, I will need to remove the workshop intersecting the bottom center facility. I should also add that in this mod, you can build over other facilities. There are empty rooms and corridors as well to enhance this function. The 3 rooms in the bottom right of the base are empty rooms, and allow you to have your starter base finished by the end of the month. Additionally, when dismantling something, it builds an empty room over top of the old facility. So while you can't immediately build in its place, it does make the overall project go faster. This means that over the course of this month, I will work on placing living quarters and general stores over the bottom of our base. And by February, I should be able to upgrade our radars. There is one facility I plan on adding to this base, and that is the training center. This allows your soldiers to train their general stats without needing to go into the field. As mentioned earlier, we start out this mod with a ton of money. Since I need a specialized base for both research and engineering, I decide that I should work on one of these now. As I'm required to dismantle the workshop at our main base, I elect to make the engineering base first. Like mentioned, I will be adding the 3 core facilities in addition to the large variant of the workshop. This base is constructed in North America, and should be done by the start of February due to the power of corridors. Pressing start of the month was fairly short. We only got 4 missions this month, as we are stuck with the small radars. Firstly, we managed to shoot down a very small UFO, something you don't often see. There was still only 1 alien on this craft, and for the first month, they only send sectoids against you. The next UFO was also very small, however, this one had landed, and the third was a plain small. The small UFO had to be shot down, and many of the systems were destroyed in the process, however, this left us with a fairly easy mission. I said, however, that there were 4 missions this month, and indeed there were. This was unfortunate. Firstly, the timer on terror missions does not pause when targeted in this mod, so if it spawned too far away, you could fail to reach the mission. Even if I wasn't planning on finishing the mission, landing and taking off is far less costly than letting it despawn. Second, every mission this month is against sectoids, and compared to the now buffed floaters, they are still the worst of the 2 on these terror missions. For the moment, I will briefly detour and talk about the 3 aircraft we have available. Firstly, craft no longer just have weapon slots, they have universal slots. Each of these slots have a different size, and each craft will have a specific number of sized slots. Firstly, the Mammoth, or the buffed version of the Skyranger, has similar stats to the Skyranger with the addition of 2 small slots. The Skyraider is a smaller and faster transport craft, with space for 8 soldiers and 4 small slots. Finally, the Interceptor has 2 medium slots with no soldier transport capacity. You start out the game with one of each of these, and due to how far away this terror mission spawned, I sent in the Skyraider. This craft was able to arrive before the mission expired, and we spawned with a collection of explosive barrels in front of us. I tried my luck throwing a grenade, and it didn't quite work out. We did manage a net gain of 5 points from this trade, however, the cost of the tank was not worth 5 points. This was the end of the month. I did get some research done on the motion scanner and an alien power source, the latter of which is a prerequisite for laser weapons, but since engineering was offline, I didn't get to do anything with this technology. It would not take long to change that, though. Not only did February have a slow start, we spent a chunk of the month upgrading our radars, so we had very few missions to deal with. The first mission was against a very small UFO. While it had a crew of more than 1, it was nothing of note. Next up, we got our staff of engineers set up on the new base and set them to work making a variety of laser weapons. Initially, we only had access to the pistol, however, we would have more by the end of the month. I'll talk about them then, just know that the pistol is an upgrade over most of the weapons we currently have. From here, we had 2 more missions. The first was a small UFO, and the laser pistols made this trivial. However, the second mission was a terror mission, and just like before, it was at an uncomfortable distance. Again, I loaded up the Skyraider, this time with laser pistols, and sent in a team to see what would happen. After landing, I smoked the ramp and waited to see what I heard on the alien's turn. What I was hoping to hear on this turn was a melee attack. Sectoids run with cyber discs, and those only have ranged attacks. However, the floater's Reaper terror unit only has melee. If I heard a melee attack, then it would have meant that this mission was possible. Regardless, I sent the team in to verify that the mission was unbeatable, and to my surprise, I think they're sectoids. I don't think sectoids are doable. Mind control alone. Oh, we're in for a long mission. Okay, hold on. Establishing a beachhead inside the smoke cloud was a bit tight, though once we managed to set up, we made quick work of the floaters. While this mod does nerf your accuracy to 66% of what it would be outside of a smoke cloud, the sheer volume of fire you're able to put out means that there's no issue putting down most aliens. I went into this mission with a squad of 8, so these losses weren't bad. For the rest of the month we had little to no action, however I did finish research on the laser weapons, so I'll showcase those now. Here is every laser weapon we now have access to. You'll notice that these weapons are a direct upgrade to some parts of our current arsenal. Most of the issues I had with the previous arsenal are simply made worse in this iteration, as each laser weapon has 2 times the damage of the previous version. Even the cannons have a laser version, however there are 3 notable absences. Firstly, and most pressing, there is no shotgun. That isn't to say that there's no mid-game shotgun, just that you need a different tech to unlock it. The other two weapons, however, have an easy explanation. Both the rocket launcher and grenade launcher will get new mid-game ammo for us to use, meaning that these two weapons will be used throughout the entire game. For this period of play where I'm using laser weapons, I'm just going to continue to use my previous strategy. Most of the aliens are more durable and in some cases less threatening than the previous versions of sectoids. However, I may need to make some changes come endgame. These weapons would be slowly manufactured over the course of March, starting with the laser auto pistol. There was a good period during the month where I used exclusively the dual pistol loadout, and you may notice that in the footage. However, by the end of this month, I do have both pistols and pulse rifles manufactured. During March, we did a series of UFO missions, all of them being small or very small. There was only one casualty to note, and the missions were against a mix of floaters and armored sectoids. The second of these two enemies was a massive pain to deal with, however the standard laser pistol is still good enough to consistently penetrate armor. I did discover that most rapid-fire laser weapons did less damage against armor, but due to armor stripping, we were able to kill these aliens, eventually. There were two notable events this month. Firstly, alien craft have been periodically trying to intercept my craft on their way to missions. These were only ever very small UFOs, but they were still a bit of a threat. That changed this month. I'm not sure I've ever lost a craft with soldiers on board in this game. I assume they were all dead and recruited new troops after this, however, to my surprise, most of the team arrived back at base later this month. There was one casualty that I could find, and all of the equipment on board was lost, but I was surprised that most of the troops survived. On to the second notable event, we had another terror mission. The loss of our faster transport, I had no choice but to send the Mammoth. We did make it in time and got to do a night mission against floaters. By this time, you'll see that a number of soldiers now had laser pulse rifles, and this weapon, when used against unarmored floaters and Reapers, wreaks havoc. There wasn't a single friendly casualty on this mission. Now, to wrap up the month, I decided that I should shift my research priorities to gaining access to better craft. Harmony adds a mid-tier of craft that you can access before fully replicating alien designs, and the tech wasn't far off. I decided against purchasing a new craft and simply hoped that I'd be able to reach this tech in early April. Here is the final score for March. Shortly into April, we did manage to finish this tech. This gave us access to 3 new crafts, each of which being an upgrade of one of the previous. While I have the images on screen, these graphics do not seem to be accurate. After manufacturing one of the interdictors, I noticed that it seemed to be letting me add 3 medium items to the craft, and in my confusion, I decided to look through the config files to see what was happening. It turns out, each of the interdictor and storm charger have one more medium slot than detailed. While this does replace one of the small slots, this is extremely powerful. For reference, here are the available Tier 1 modules you can add to your craft. The medium are significantly better than the small variants, however, should you ever need to use a small item in a medium slot, you can. Additionally, there are Tier 2 versions available of each of these modules. Those look like this. You'll notice that they only have a small version. That is because there are advanced medium modules that you gain access to after doing further research. Here are those modules. They provide a variety of buffs, however I decided that the Brawler module would be the best, as it would be the most useful when we got intercepted. Additionally, here are the laser weapons for your craft. There is 1 small weapon and 2 medium weapons. The small weapon is a flat upgrade over any of the small weapon systems you could be using. However, the medium costs far more than the other medium weapon systems for only a decent upgrade. I still end up using these laser weapons, though I could see a world where someone would go without them. Returning to the craft, without the knowledge of the medium slots, it would be a pretty hard decision between the 3. I was always going to use the interdictor, as we simply needed the interception potential. However, since the storm charger has the capacity to carry 12 soldiers, I was torn between using that as a hybrid interceptor and transport vessel versus just running the Mastodon. In the end, the Mastodon was far more costly to produce, and since the value between the craft was similar, I chose the storm charger. I also decided that I needed an interceptor at our North American engineering base, so I was having trouble getting to the UFOs on that side of the globe and had no ability to retreat should they be hostile. As for the craft loadouts, I was originally deciding what medium laser weapon I wanted. The pulse laser would be good for defense, while the beam can one-shot the smaller UFOs. After discovering that the craft have an additional medium slot, I just ran both. As mentioned for the interdictors, I gave them a Brawler module in their 3rd slot, whereas for the Storm Charger they got a Tier 2 fuel and engine module. Now, I've just spent a lot of time talking about these craft, however, we never actually got to use them during April. We got 2 whole missions this month, 1 small UFO and 1 terror mission. The terror mission was against armored sectoids, so try as I might, we could not beat this mission. That was probably the biggest loss during this playthrough, as a couple of these soldiers had quite impressive stats. I did complete research on the hyperwave decoder near the end of this month, however, some facilities now require materials to produce, and the hyperwave decoder was one of those. These are the materials required for construction. I'll talk about how to get these once we actually have them, however, as of right now, some of these are unobtainable and the others are too rare for me to actually have enough of. After discovering that the hyperwave decoder was out of reach, and seeing the lack of missions this month, I decided that it was time to construct bases all over the globe. Firstly, I'd need a research base, so I'd set that up in the middle of Africa, and over the month of May I'd work on completing it. May came and went without any new developments. We were able to complete 6 missions during the month and had a few casualties along the way. The most noteworthy event was a game crash that I had to fix by editing the save and notepad, and this allowed for a terror mission to spawn. This terror mission was against Snakemen, so we didn't stick around. We did finally get to use the new craft, and I discovered that the Storm Charger had these 2 doors near the back of the craft. Additionally, I got to make use of all of the heavy laser weapons that I'd made, both of which make decently short work of the armored sectoids. Finally, I did construct the framework for a research base, however I left out the large living quarters in the lab, as we couldn't afford it this month. I instead built a small living quarters so we could house 25 soldiers on the base for defense. And just before the last day of the month, we were notified of this. An alien outpost. From what I could tell, the aliens appear to have a number of different tiers of bases, and the outpost seems to be an alien base map that is only 3x3 chunks in size. It's likely that this geoscape icon indicates what tier of base that you're dealing with. This was the end of May, however, so I made plans to raid it in the next month. And those plans did not go well. This outpost was crewed by the same armored sectoid and floater mix we've been seeing for a while now, so the small team I was able to muster would not be able to take over this outpost. There was a bit of mind control in the first turn, so after this I simply left. I did discover later that this base was being supplied by medium UFOs, and this got me curious. I had no idea if a medium UFO crewed by mixed aliens would have access to mind control, so I started watching for these medium UFOs on their way to the outpost. While waiting, we did a few UFOs and encountered no new aliens. While we needed these to keep our score up, they were nothing of note. Just after these missions, research completed on power armor, and I checked the requirements from engineering. I discovered that the loathed armored sectoids were actually invaluable, as their corpse could be salvaged for a powered skeleton used in various suits of armor. I hadn't been selling corpses this playthrough since I knew such recipes existed, so I had almost 100 of these things laying around in storage. Unfortunately, I needed to complete the research on one to be able to salvage it, so we'd have to wait a bit longer for our new armor. In the next period of waiting, one of the medium UFOs from earlier was picked up on radar, and I was able to get a craft to its landing site. We had the cover of buildings in the middle of the map, so this allowed us to clear out the perimeter of the UFO without much resistance. The heavy laser made short work of the armored sectoids, though they were the only weapons in our arsenal capable of this. I spent the entire mission just waiting for one of these sectoids to finally use one of their morale attacks against us, however, this moment never came. Breaching the UFO was a pretty big issue, since we couldn't kill the armored sectoids in one hit unless we used a heavy weapon, and those were extremely cumbersome to move around. With the 80 time units possessed by both of the aliens we were against, we did lose soldiers in the breaching process. This mission was followed by more generic UFO missions, however, we did get another shot at taking on one of those medium UFOs. This one wasn't supplying anything. It instead appeared as though it was equipped to capture live targets. The outside of this map was dominated by floater medics with small launchers. You can tell the rank of an alien due to their color, and in this case, the floaters with white capes are medics. Since these weapons were non-lethal, clearing the outside was fairly easy. However, in taking my time to clear the outside, I allowed over 20 turns to pass. After 20 turns, the aliens gain perfect knowledge of where your soldiers are, and this went about as well as you're likely thinking it did. Most of the soldiers got stunned by small launchers in the following turns, and it came down to this one soldier. Thankfully, Ivory Knight was able to pull through, however, had the floater not died, it would have likely stunned both of them. Not sure what would have happened in this stalemate, however, I didn't have to find out. From here, we got a bunch of research and engineering work done. This included all of the steps required to get power armor, so I was able to get 3 suits of it made before the month finished. I tried out a second alien outpost that I had discovered earlier in this month, however, it too was housing a mixed race crew, and one of the 3 in power armor turned out to be susceptible to mind control. He ended the month of June by abandoning another city to chrysalids, and while this did hurt our score, it was nothing we couldn't manage. Now, to start out July, I built a hyperwave decoder on the home base. This would render the base's radar inoperational for a portion of the month. However, once it was online, it would be guaranteed to reveal UFOs in its range, and it would reveal some info about the race piloting it. In addition to this, I was able to start research on various requirements of the alien containment. I was able to recover these components from the previously mentioned medium supply vessel, so we would soon be able to capture aliens. During this period of research and construction, we did more UFO missions, and while all of these were small, one of these UFOs had an interesting surprise in store for us. While this was a surprise, it wasn't all that bad. After some time, both the hyperwave decoder and alien containment research project was completed. I started construction on the alien containment and started the plasma weapon research projects. We would not be able to use or reproduce these weapons without capturing live aliens, however, we could still get the stats of the weapons we were going up against. These projects took no more than a day each, so here are all of the plasma weapon stats. Using the standard human weapons as a base, these have about 3 times the damage of their human counterpart. We will have a variant for each of the human weapons once we gain access to them, however, this is what we're working with right now. Now, comparing these weapons to power armor, you'll see that the armor value is basically on par with them. This means that we're fairly resistant to these weapons, something that will be a huge comfort going forwards. The plasma rifle is currently the most prevalent weapon here, so we are going to have a fairly easy time dealing with reaction shots going forwards due to the high time unit costs to fire. Now, in addition to power armor, I started buying the stealth armor off the market. It may not look like much, however, in the hidden stats, it provides a number of advantages aside from armor. The primary reason I'm interested in it is due to the smoke vision it provides. You'll remember from my previous playthroughs that I live inside of smokes for most missions, and this smoke vision stat allows you to see further inside of smoke than without the armor. Currently, none of the aliens share this vision bonus, so this will allow us to be the ones to see the aliens first. This is about as effective as you'd expect. While inside smokes, we are consistently able to react to the aliens first, and most of the time, the aliens run off after getting shot. Power armor also shares this smoke vision, though it is to a lesser degree. Using our new equipment in missions was extremely effective, and just in time. These next missions were the first appearance of mutons. If you recall the muton stats from the intro, you'll know that these are extremely durable. However, on top of this durability, they take about 40% of incoming damage from all conventional damage types. This means that a laser pistol will do 20 damage instead of 50. With our advanced line of sight, the mutons were able to be contained, however, it was a slow process. This was immediately followed by a base assault. The North American engineering base was attacked by the sectoid floater mix we'd been facing for a while now. However, there was one notable difference. These aliens had mind control. This was a never-ending plague across the entire mission. While there were a couple of issues on my end, such as forgetting to buy smoke grenades and not having bought stealth armor for each of the support bases yet, mind control made this mission nearly impossible. Every single soldier eventually seemed to succumb to these attacks. This was so bad that it eventually came down to 2 soldiers camped out on the upper floor of one of the general stores. At some point I'll go back and look at these soldiers' size strengths, because this mission was genuinely that miserable. Now, this was bad, but nothing irreplaceable. With how well everything was going prior to this, we could comfortably recover from this loss. It would take a few months to rebuild the base and the stockpile of items lost, but since we had a collection of power armor and a strategy to fight off the aliens, the next few months would merely be a test of consistency. So for the rest of July, we worked our way through missions. There were 2 Snakeman craft and a landed medium UFO. This medium UFO was far easier than the previous attempts. While power armor does make you more durable, it also significantly buffs your stats. The largest of these buffs is to strength, leaving soldiers wearing this armor with over 100 strength. This is enough to carry multiple primary weapons, so for most power-armored soldiers, they will have both a heavy auto laser and a rocket launcher on their person at any given time. This means that the unwieldy breaching process just became a lot easier. I had a team of 4 in power armor for this mission, and they cleaned up the UFO like it was nothing. This could have been down to the design of the UFO, and the limited number of aliens inside, however it was much faster than the previous 2 attempts. Now, one of the aliens was a panicking floater leader. I made sure to capture this, as we finally had access to an alien containment. This would be useful in the future, even if it would likely not be hard to come into contact with more of these. That was it for the month of July, and we had a solid score despite abandoning another terror mission. August opened with a small UFO, and it was nothing of note. I was next given the opportunity to attempt a medium supply ship crewed by snakemen. Since I was able to do the sectoid floater race from earlier, I figured this wouldn't be an issue. I landed, and performed the same landing procedure as usual. However, snakemen now had access to Psi. After shooting a few of the aliens from the confines of our craft, I left. This was unfortunate, as it would have been nice to have these supply ships for resources and points. Luckily, I immediately got a second chance at a medium UFO, and this one was a Snakeman Harvester. The crew of this ship was also different. It was deemed a harvest team instead of a garrison. I figured I'd try the mission and see how the first turn or two went. In the first couple turns, I spotted mutons, and while normally this would not be something to celebrate, mutons have no Psi access. In the following turns, it became clear that a significant portion of the crew wasn't snakemen. My running theory so far was that floaters became leaders on a craft where leader was the highest ranking alien and floaters were an option. However, I have not verified this to be true. The mission was fairly easy, as we had access to powerful enough gear to comfortably crack medium vessels. We never got hit by a Psi attack, and on top of that, we got an alien engineer. I'd need aliens with various professions to unlock different portions of the alien arsenal, and the engineer was needed for plasma weapons. Since the research base was completed shortly after this mission, I sent the engineer over for an interrogation, and the aliens didn't seem to like that. This base defense would be different from the last one. Firstly, I didn't forget to buy grenades and armor, so that would be helpful. The second and potentially more useful addition was the laser defense facility. The main base started with a standard AP defense room, and researching a final laser tech gave access to this upgraded laser version. This facility only costs 300,000 and 24 alien alloys to build. And while it takes up a room on the base to build, placing this directly after the access lift allows you to defend this position significantly easier than were at a living quarters. This made a solid difference in the mission. Not only did the room spawn 4 laser turrets, the room itself allows you to crouch behind barricades out of line of sight of the aliens. Even if the turrets were destroyed, soldiers could still defend this room in relative safety. This made the mission notably easier, as the turrets were able to put out free damage against the aliens who were attempting to break into the base. Similar to last time, only a portion of the force actually came in the first wave, including one ethereal. However, this was a very small portion of the force. After discovering that there were a ton more aliens camping out in the hangars, I retreated back to the laser defenses. This second wave of mutons hit like a truck. I had commented earlier in this mission saying that a wave of mutons running at us would have so much health that they'd probably win, and that came pretty close here. This second wave walked right through our checkpoint like there weren't even soldiers there. However, my second wave was able to deal with the majority of their wave too. The next 2 turns were a skirmish against the last few mutons to see who would come out on top. The rest of this month was a combination of small and medium UFOs. I was doing every supply ship I got, since I needed to replace the lost stockpile from the original engineering base. These missions were going about as usual, up until I did a landed small UFO. This UFO was outside of hyperwave decoder range, so I didn't know ahead of time what I was getting into. This was the landing site. You'll notice the ship we are going against is distinctly more purple than the previous ones. I had no idea what this was, and had forgotten to add more soldiers to the ship after losing the tank in a previous mission. This was cause for concern, as there were a mass of mutons outside the craft, and if this was anything like the base defense, there could be an ethereal on board. I slowly worked across the map with a standard smoke strat, and there were no ethereals to be found here either. However, I had no idea what to make of this initially. In addition to having a more advanced ship, these mutons were also using advanced plasma weapons. These weapons were almost certainly more powerful than the ones we'd been facing so far, and they self-destructed when their user was killed. While still a bit concerned, I moved on with the month and did another one of the landed supply ships. This was similarly easy to the previous ones, however, before I got a chance to breach, the aliens inside started to panic. This was a shame, but there was very little I could have done about it. I had no idea the ships could even detonate like this. Next up, I got this reading on the hyperwave decoder. An advanced scout ship. This must have been what I had unwittingly landed at earlier. simply a new class of ship that was far more threatening than the previous ones. I sent out an interceptor to see what I was up against, however, this was bad. The ring around that destroyer meant that it was aggressive, and it was heading right towards the interceptor. I told the interceptor to return to base, and waited. These fights are always a coin flip, but this time I won. It was close, but the damage dealt in attacks past the first one did significantly lower damage, so I get the feeling that the first hit was near max possible damage. After this, I dispatched a transport to attempt to shoot down the advanced scout from range. I couldn't get through the shields, so I instead waited for the ship to land. This mission was the same as the Mutons, just with snake men in their place. These advanced ships seemed to have the same aliens on board as the previous designs, just with superior weapons. The mission was won, and in the next month I'd get around to the destroyer. After various start-of-the-month tasks, including starting psi training, I started the mission. As expected, there were a collection of snake men with advanced heavy plasma guns, and one chrysalid. What didn't show up this mission was the ship itself. This was annoying, as these vessels have a lot of valuable components, but there was nothing I could do about this. Moving on, we did another medium UFO. This was nothing out of the ordinary, other than one little moment. Oh well. The rest of the missions after this point provided nothing more than resources. However, we spent all this time under threat of invasion. Eventually, this medium UFO showed up and was suspiciously heading right towards the home base. This was a Snake Man craft, so I was instantly concerned about chrysalids. I backed up and waited. All that came out of here were psi attacks, and this became more than a nuisance during the following turns. I was extremely concerned about chrysalids knowing our exact location, so my plan was to push into the hangar before turn 20. The closer I got, however, the more and more people started getting hit by psi attacks. By the time I made it to the hangars, it was clear that this mission had ethereals with small launchers in place of the normal chrysalid. I had all of our soldiers in power armor move laser autocannons along the floor, and only pick them up to shoot had they not panicked during the previous turn. This was effective, even if it was a hilarious solution to the problem. The ethereals did not have enough attacks to suppress every single one of the soldiers attacking them, in addition to having non-lethal weapons. While this did allow us to win the defense, there were two active missions hunting down the home base. One was this odd Snake Man mix, however the other was pure ethereal. Not only would the infantry be completely psi-capable, the terror units are some of the scariest in the game. I had spent the previous portion of this month working towards unlocking plasma weapons. These projects were completed shortly after the defense, so here are the stats of the basic plasma weapons we now have access to. Damage was 3 times the human weapons. However, the rapid-fire variant would require a lengthy project to complete, so this plasma pistol here would be our primary weapon with a few heavies for support. This was also just in time for the engineering base completion, so these weapons will start appearing in future missions. In the base defense, I made an effort to capture an ethereal, so this would be researched shortly. For the rest of the month, I did missions and waited on research projects. Of the researches that were completed, not only did we complete the ethereal leader, but we also completed the psionic implantation tech. This will supposedly allow us to implant our soldiers with the alien psi tech, improving their psi stats and overall resistance to attacks. I needed to build a hospital facility in the main base to get this done, so I removed one of the hangars from the home base and began remodeling. To end out the month, we had another solid score, and we got to preview all of the psi stats of our soldiers. This is bad. For those of you who have no idea what's going on, a soldier will normally have 0 to 100 psi strength. This strength is used directly when resisting attacks, and you normally want a score of roughly 80 or higher for true resistance. I could get into formulas for attacks, however, that would take a fair amount of explanation, and given these psi changes, I'm not even sure they'd be completely accurate. Not only were these psi changes bad, October was an extremely poor month for overall missions. This wasn't for a lack of alien activity, though. There was plenty. We were simply suffering from having early game interceptors. While our current craft could specifically take on the alien light destroyer in theory, it wouldn't be easy. It wasn't feasible to take on most of these craft, however, and thus I had to simply avoid most missions, as the aliens always had something on guard. I was still able to get a couple missions, though. Of note, the alien outpost supply missions were not being guarded, so I continued to farm these missions where possible. The first mission this month was one such supply ship. This was a city mission, and while the ship actually spawned, combined with the nighttime, this mission had a couple of unlucky casualties. From here, there was a bit of waiting. The first plasma weapon I had gained access to was the plasma shotgun, and I was getting curious as to how you were actually intended to manufacture this weapon. I discovered that the plasma array item could be crafted into a large number of alien weapon components, the primary piece needed for the shotgun, and I got to researching this. The shotgun was powerful for a number of reasons. My number one reason was that the ammo for this weapon required nothing more than money, no Illyrium or any other components. This made the shotgun completely renewable, and meant that so long as you had the gun, we'd be able to use it indefinitely. The second and more obvious reason is the stat line. 12 shots at 36 rapid plasma damage is extremely strong, and would make this our primary weapon for the foreseeable future. This was showcased quite well in the next supply ship that we did. This weapon could kill a floater in one hit from almost any range, assuming that a good soldier was holding it, of course. And this made breaching far more consistent. Due to the weapon damage formula, we could kill an armored sectoid with it, though generally this only worked from rear or side armor. The hospital was completed shortly after, and I got to give one of our soldiers the first psi implant. This implant gives some small bonuses to each of the psi stats, however the one we care about is strength. This implant gives a soldier plus 30 psi strength, meaning that our first soldier here will now have over 80 psi strength. This is enough to resist almost all psi attacks. However, we needed to kill 3 psionic aliens per implant, so this was all we would get for now. These were the only 2 UFOs I got a chance to go after this month, and seeing as I had abandoned a terror mission and knew that the aliens had convinced a country to withdraw from XCOM, something had to be done. During this month, I had gotten 1 soldier up to 80 psi strength, and manufactured 4 laser assault tanks. These were both measures against psi attacks from the aliens, however, I needed to use them offensively here. My final move for this month was to invade an alien outpost. The outpost close to the base was primarily floaters, and was the only one like this other than the full-scale base in Hawaii. I loaded up 2 assault tanks and 4 psi-resilient soldiers, including Keep On Laughin', and deployed the craft. These soldiers had the best weapons we had available to us, so combined with support tanks, I figured this was our best shot at clearing out one of these outposts. You'll recall from earlier that these missions share the alien base tile set, but at a size of 3x3 chunks. We spawned in the center chunk for this mission, so while exiting the lift would be an issue, we had full scanner coverage of the base. There were some scattered aliens on all sides, however, the southern room seemed to be housing almost a dozen. I waited inside the access lift for a few turns to see if psi was used, and if the aliens would come to us. However, only one of those things actually came to be. Once these turns had passed, I moved the soldiers out and north. I would sweep the base and regroup in the south to finish off the mission. Nothing of note happened when sweeping. However, once we regrouped, a few psi attacks began to be thrown our way. One of the leaders in this base turned out to be a sectoid, and I foolishly captured it. You may be wondering why this is foolish, but in this mod, the alien corpses can be scavenged for items, and this sectoid was a psionic alien. I didn't know at the time, but there was no further projects that I cared about stemming from this sectoid leader, so this was one of the many instances where the alien was more valuable to me dead. This was it for the month. The final score revealed that I did in fact need to complete that outpost mission. The 1500 points it gave put our score back above 0. With how this month went, my new research goal was to work through whatever projects I needed to gain access to a new fighter craft. I had hoped these would be done in the next month, as I didn't have another alien base that wouldn't fight back against invaders. This meant that I needed to decide what craft would be appropriate to research right now. This turned out to be a fairly simple process. Here are the 4 craft available for research. There are 2 paths to choose from, combat and transport, and both have soldier capacity. The combat craft has a similar soldier capacity to our current ones, and since I didn't need an upgrade on the number of soldiers I could take to missions, I decided to go with the combat line. Both of these combat vehicles would be a major upgrade over the interdictor, however it would take most of the month to complete the research projects. While we waited, I started working on getting more of the psi emitters required to enhance our soldiers' psi capacities. We completed a Snake Man supply ship and snagged a few ethereals off of a landed ethereal supply ship. Next up, we had enough soldiers to comfortably assault a small ethereal craft and got a fair number of new emitters. This was enough time for the first of the 2 craft research projects to finish. Since I needed something as soon as possible, I set engineering to work. This didn't take all that long, however, once the craft was completed, I discovered that there was a new item added specifically as fuel for these craft. This required deuterium fuel rods and delirium. Neither of these were particularly rare, and manufacturing this fuel was a bit expensive, but overall, this was nothing more than an annoyance. I transferred all of this to the home base and loaded everything onto the Firestorm. With the Firestorm, I was now able to take some more risks. The first of these risks was a terror mission. While this isn't something you normally want a combat vehicle for, should there be any ships on patrol, I'd want to either outrun them or have a chance at winning in a fight. There was nothing this time, but that's not always the case. The mission itself was against Ethereals. This meant that I was unlikely to win, especially since the new sectopods could probably beat God in a fight. Regardless, I took a look around the landing site to see what was available. After an extremely close call, I decided that I should just head out. I was able to grab a few corpses, so this wasn't all for nothing. Something of note here is that in the previous terror missions, there was a negative modifier called the Terror Continues that would normally appear after abandoning missions like this. I'm uncertain as to why it did not appear here, and would be testing later to see how I could avoid this. I finished out this month by doing 2 supply ships and another small ethereal craft. These missions were nothing of note, and as you've noticed, I haven't shown any soldier deaths this month. We managed to avoid any losses over the course of November. This wouldn't maintain though. The month of December started a bit slow, and the research project for the ultimate combat craft was completed during this period. Said craft had access to large weapon slots, and gave access to the first of the large combat modules. This was the combat suite, and this was a strong item. There are a number of other modules available, and in the future we will also gain access to large weapons. I took a look through all of the modules available to see what we could work towards, and decided that the ambush module was the only one worth pursuing. The Inferno had 2 large module slots, and while I could simply have made 2 of the combat variant, I liked the buffs provided by the ambush suite, specifically the shields. From here, I did a few new missions while waiting for the Inferno's equipment to be completed. Of the missions, the first interesting one was a base defense. This was at the home base, and against a mixed race of just about every alien in the game. This was a little bit intimidating, however, it was nothing we couldn't handle. These aliens had the standard plasma weapons that we were mostly immune to by this point, and there were only a couple of ethereals tagging along. As for the rest of the following missions, there's one particular detail of note here, and this is the appearance of a final alien race. Technically, this is a branch of the same alien races we've seen so far, however, these aliens were significantly tougher than before. This so-called mixed/invasion race was a combination of ethereals, mutons, and celitids. Both the ethereals and mutons were significantly stronger versions of the former aliens that we've encountered. We could still kill the ethereals with a heavy laser, thanks to the fact that it ignores a percentage of the target's armor. However, you can fire the plasma shotgun at these new mutons until everything around them has been leveled, and they will still be standing. Finally, the celitids are noteworthy because they seem to have some level of thermal vision. This allows them to see through the smokes better than our soldiers can. While these enemies on their own aren't the worst, getting hit by one of these things strips a significant amount of your armor, and getting hit 2 to 3 times can leave you completely defenseless. While we did still manage to get through the missions against this race, it took a fairly long time. We were able to play the game at our own pace and deal with each alien individually, at least for the most part. This race could easily cause us problems should it appear on a larger craft. While the battlescape may have just become significantly more difficult, we could at least hold our own in the air now. This was the point where the Inferno was completely equipped, and it was ready to be tested against the alien's craft. While it did just fine against the light destroyer escorts, we've been seeing those for a while now, and the Firestorm could handle those just fine as well. So the first real test for the Inferno would be against a medium destroyer escort. The next few missions, including the one against the destroyer, were not particularly difficult. However, the mission that came after all of these crash site recoveries would be a very different story. This was going to be rough. That was an elite battleship, meaning that these aliens would have the advanced tier of weapons, and that race was in fact the one that I had previously mentioned. I didn't have a full stockpile of weapons on this base for each of our soldiers at this point. I had only managed to make enough to keep our assault craft stocked, and had very little beyond that. We did at least have the base layout on our side. Thankfully, this craft targeted the home base. Not only was this the only place where soldiers were actually equipped to fight off these aliens, the soldiers here were also psi resilient. Additionally, I had what I consider to be the optimal base layout here. The access lift was still a problematic point, as aliens and soldiers could still spawn side by side. However, these unfortunate soldiers could retreat to the laser security station. The second detail is that I added a back door into the hangars. I made use of the straight hull corridors here, and added another laser security station on the top right of the base to make it work as a funnel that the aliens would have to fight through before gaining access to the top of our base. This worked quite well, and allowed me to enter the hangars from two sides instead of just one once the first wave of aliens had been depleted. This was only the beginning though, and it was going to be a long one. Initially, I proceeded as standard. I made an effort to give the best weapons to the soldiers with the strongest psi resistance, and made note of these soldiers' positions upon starting. I then moved the soldiers in danger back into our lines, and ran the soldiers who were near the back of the base forwards. There were a few aliens visible in the hangars and access lifts, so I had the turrets take a few shots at each of these to get some early damage. It was time to see how bad this mission was going to be. The psi attacks were quite manageable, however, the sheer volume of enemies was not. Assuming the best case scenario, we would be able to handle 3 of those mutons per turn, and that would require everyone having a shotgun and everyone being in a firing position at the start of a turn. Since neither of these were the case, we were just going to have to hope for the best. I started trying to take out the Celatids since they were the softest targets, and still posed just as much of a threat when supported by the other aliens. Where possible, I did put damage onto the mutons, but these mutons were walking tanks on par with the lobstermen of Terror from the Deep. The backdoor team had better luck with containment, though there were very few aliens that had showed an interest in braving this corridor. Over the next few turns, we got pushed back further and further, however we did manage to avoid losses. Things would turn upside down when the aliens started to successfully mind control soldiers. These were soldiers with between 60 and 70 psi strength, so while I didn't think they'd be immune, this was far worse than I'd anticipated. The most noteworthy of these mind control attacks was against the acting commander BR-54. BR-54 got mind controlled and proceeded to run into the front lines of the aliens. While this was fine for the turn, the second mind control wore off, BR would become a target again. This was quite lucky. Trying to rescue a soldier who is fighting back is extremely difficult. However, picking up an item and running off? This would be much easier. I was able to run a soldier to the body, pick it up, and run back to our lines. From there, BR would get what medical attention we could give, and I could relax a little. Most of the aggressive aliens had been dealt with by this point. As per usual though, we still had to deal with those who refused to leave the hangar. This was a messy process. Initially getting into the access lift wasn't terrible, however, I underestimated the advanced plasma rifles. We had been almost completely immune to the previous iteration of pistol and rifle, so I figured that while our soldiers may take a bit of damage, they'd never be killed outright by one of these rifles. This was not the case. From this point on, I had to take it slowly and carefully when trying to finish off these last aliens. This took some time, but we were able to get it done. We had an impressive score this mission, though 3 soldiers were lost. After this unfortunate defense, we did a few more missions. There was nothing super interesting here, aside from a mission against an ethereal cargo ship. The ethereals themselves were not all that interesting. We'd been fighting them for a while now. However, this was a landed craft, and despite that, every single member of the crew spawned outside of the ship. I had never seen this before, and thought that was worth sharing. These final missions allowed us to collect enough psi emitters to implant every single one of the soldiers at the home base. These soldiers would now all be resilient to psi attacks, though, as showcased during the invasion attempt, resilient is not the same as immune. This was the end of the month. The monthly score was classified as sensational, something I had also never seen before, and this came with a solid income boost. I used this money to start constructing an additional base, this one being used as a warehouse for all of the items we were now collecting. We'd been recovering cargo ships with extreme regularity, so this base would be useful. 5 of the next 6 missions were against cargo ships of both the standard and elite class. These missions varied wildly in difficulty due to the time of day and alien race we were facing. However, all of them were completed. Not only did we collect a large number of the psionic emitters needed to enhance our soldiers, the research project on the power suit weapons was completed. This tech would allow us to unlock and manufacture the endgame weapons available in Harmony. The first of these weapons that I unlocked was the Fate Plasma Pistol. This high-damage pistol is a hybrid of the standard and auto designs. It has an inbuilt modifier making enemies' armor 80% as effective as it would normally be, on top of its high damage profile. This is an extremely strong weapon, however it requires 6 of the advanced plasma pistols to produce just one. The ammo is similarly expensive, and combined with long crafting times, this weapon will not see widespread use for a long time, if ever. This was still a solid weapon to have in reserves for the most elite soldiers among our ranks, so I made an effort to make as many of these Fate pistols as possible. I then started research on another one of these weapons and carried on. This weapon was completed shortly after, however it was less useful than the pistol. The Scourge Acid Blaster was the result of research on the advanced alien rifles. It is a shotgun that deals acid damage, and while acid damage does have a higher potency against the aliens we are using the plasma shotgun against, it is not a major upgrade. The damage dealt increases by about 50% on average. However, the damage spread on the shotgun is much wider, allowing for spikes. It does have an immense armor stripping capacity, far greater than any other weapon we have access to. However, most of the aliens we are facing do not have strong enough armor for that to be a major factor in the field. The real issue is that the ammo for this gun requires 2 Celatid corpses each, and we are not encountering Celatids in nearly that amount. The magazine size is also only 6, meaning that it's basically impossible to make widespread use of the gun. With the accessibility of the plasma shotgun, it didn't make sense to work towards any of these guns, especially since I could make more guns than clips as of the time of research. Since I wasn't using most of the heavy weapons we had access to anyway by this point, I pivoted my research goals over to the Psi Amplifier. I'd put this project off as I didn't expect we'd be able to make use of the item when I initially unlocked the research option. From here, I started to shoot down cargo ships wherever this was possible. This did have the effect of allowing more retaliation missions to spawn, and on Superhuman, there's normally a 20% chance for one such mission to spawn with every alien craft that is shot down. However, these missions are significantly easier when the ship interior is completely destroyed. I should note that it wasn't possible to easily shoot down an elite cargo ship, and all of the ethereal cargo ships were of this variety. However, the armored sectoids and snakemen were completely helpless against this strategy. The next mission was against one of these snakemen cargo ships. You can see here what shooting these down does to its interior. The next 2 missions were against ethereals and allowed for more emitters to be collected. Following this, there were 2 more missions against snakemen. However, after these 2 missions, some interesting alien activity appeared. This fleet of ships was working on the construction of an alien base. This base was of the Muton variety, and after a ship classed as the Mothership entered the atmosphere, I began to make plans to recover the vessel. I had no idea what would be in store for me here. The race behind this vessel were Mutons, and while these were dangerous aliens, on their own, Mutons can be dealt with. What I was worried about was the inevitable ethereal presence. This mothership was certain to have over 30 aliens on board, with an unknown number of ethereals. It was very possible that this mission was just unbeatable. Our soldiers at this point were resilient to Psi, and that was great for missions where only a couple of ethereals were present. Some of the weaker soldiers could be made to panic, however, those with 80 plus Psi strength were just fine. This mission, though, was a very different story. This was the first alien turn. Whatever aliens were on this mission caused one of the 80 plus Psi strength soldiers to panic, and while this was bad, I did have a feeling I could manage, should I be able to exit the craft on turn 2. This was the point where I grabbed everybody and left. It was possible to work our way through the mission in the same style as the previous base defense where we had our first encounter with ethereals. However, I could not manage to spread the team out fast enough for this to be viable. I had hoped that there would be an ethereal commander, as my understanding of the tech tree at this moment led me to believe that one was required for major research advancements. But there would be other opportunities and crafts with a larger crew capacity that I could utilize. I instead returned to base and did a few more cargo ship missions to end out January. We had another extremely high score for the end of the month, and just before this month had ended, I recruited new soldiers. During the month's transition, there were 50 total soldiers on the home base, and less than half of them at this moment were Psi-trained. I started further training between months, and after exiting the screen, discovered that the Psi Amp had been completed on this very same day. The Psi Amp on its own wasn't all that different from vanilla. The fear projector from earlier still made a better Psi device for training. However, the amp allows for mind control attacks to be made instead of just panic, so it'd be good to have a few of these on hand. The real benefit from researching the Psi amp was Psi power armor. This was something that I had thought was locked behind the ethereal commander. I would have researched this tech far earlier had I realized that this would be an option following it, as Psi power armor is not only stronger, but gives your soldiers better Psi resistances too. This armor would have allowed us to complete the Mothership, even if it wouldn't have been a priority at that point. On the subject of motherships, there was an additional alien base mission underway, and this one was for the construction of an ethereal base. At this point, I thought I would need an ethereal commander to beat the game, so this base was on our sights for future missions. In the meantime, I worked through a few of the filler missions at the start of the month. These missions were interrupted by a base defense at the home base, and this was an advanced craft crewed by snakemen. While this was threatening in a vacuum, the snakemen and chrysalid were extremely vulnerable to the plasma shotgun. In combination with the lack of Psi presence, this left us with a relatively easy mission. We returned to our regularly scheduled cargo ship missions from here. However, a new trend started to develop. While this was a crazy turn, the important note is that grenades started getting kills. This carried on over a few missions, accumulating in a supply ship mission against mutons. My assumption that mutons' low time unit counts would prevent them from throwing grenades was inaccurate. This allowed them to get multiple kills. Armor is only 50% effective against them. This mission was followed by a terror mission against snakemen. For the most part, with these terror missions, I'd been avoiding them. One single cargo ship mission was enough to offset the points penalty from one of these missions, and as such, I couldn't be bothered to attempt them. This mission was different though. While I had initially planned to leave early, I had started attempting to mind control various aliens over missions. The soldiers training their Psi stats had started to reach the caps of what they could achieve, so I figured any aliens that were meant to be able to be mind control would be vulnerable right about now. And I was right. This led to a decisive mission against these snakemen, as not only were the generic infantry vulnerable, the chrysalid itself could also be mind controlled by a sufficiently trained soldier. After this mission, I decided that we needed a large group of soldiers with Psi abilities, and dedicated more to be trained. The missions after this were an awkward combination of Psi training and standard procedure. While it wasn't all that difficult to spam out panic attacks for experience gain every time I saw an alien, now I was able to work mind control into my breaching strategy against most races. I've mentioned this new stat exactly once before, however, all soldiers now have something called psionic energy. This stat is spent when casting Psi attacks and regenerates slowly, with different speeds depending on the armor set that you're wearing. In most cases on Superhuman, this is 13 energy per turn. However, some armor gives higher or lower regen. In the case of a panic attack, it will cost less than 13 energy to cast. The two different Psi implements we have available to us have different requirements, however, both are quite low. The mind control attack, however, requires 40 energy. This is around 3 turns of energy regen to cast, so you are quite limited in how frequently you can use this attack. It should be noted that soldiers can have up to 100 Psi energy, though you can save your attacks for a single turn and dish out 2 per soldier. Should you fail to finish off the aliens in that one turn though, you'll be out of energy for the next. This game of only using psi attacks at the right time was something I'd be getting used to for a while. However, this wasn't all that bad in the long run. Psi was still extremely powerful even in this nerfed state. After these few missions, the research project on the new armor was completed. This allowed us to make 2 different suits of armor, both of which augmenting the soldier's psi capacities. First, and the most likely to see widespread use, was the defense suit. This suit exchanged some of the soldier's psi skill for a buff to their strength. While both of these stats are equal with regards to casting, on defense, strength is 5 times more valuable. Seeing as most of the soldiers on this base were only okay with their psi strength, this would be the standard issue armor for the foreseeable future. Especially on secondary bases, this armor would likely be used until the very end of the game, as it buffed a soldier's psi strength without it having to be revealed. The second suit was the attack suit. This suit allowed the soldier to fly and buffed their psi skill alone. This was extremely useful for soldiers who already had high psi strength, as it would increase the potency of their psi attacks. This suit also buffed the psi energy regen to 17 a turn instead of 13, allowing these soldiers to cast a few more attacks over the mission compared to the standard armor. I would be making a small number of these suits for the best of the best, as they would be helpful in enhancing the power of the mind control attacks that I was already integrating into our strategy. I set engineering to work and started the tech titled Super Soldiers. This was the end of the month, and I had another 5-digit score. This was the point where the next 20 soldiers had also finished their psi training, and they were all given implants with the materials I had stocked on the base over the past month. The final batch would be done after the next month, and I was hoping that I wouldn't need any more recruits in the future. The month started out slow enough to have a few suits of psi defense armor made, and distributed to the old vets from the beginning of the campaign. Most notable of the faces was BR, the still acting commander. I was able to do a couple more missions from here, and the psi defense armor was a huge comfort. As we progressed through the month, more and more of the suits were made, and shortly before Muton's supply ship, I even made a few suits of psi attack armor. This was the best decision I could have made, and I didn't even know it. What I had missed when looking at the stats of the psi attack suit was this little note in the description. This meant that the psi attack suit did in fact have the ability to see through walls within a very limited range. Not only did this work through walls, it didn't take elevation into account, and this made the motion scanner almost completely obsolete, as one guy on the roof of the ship could spot all of the aliens inside. While the clearing effort was mostly fine here, this little moment is worth showcasing. Yeah. Over the next few missions, I slowly started to phase out the old vets and psi defense armor for rookies in power armor. This was as people reached the peak of what their stats could be, since these soldiers no longer needed training. Before most of these soldiers got to take a break, however, this happened. This was on a mission against the mixed/invasion enemies. However, I was not expecting this to be the point at which someone died. The fact that the front armor of the new psi defense armor was not strong enough to resist the advanced heavy plasma was a concern. This meant that only the final tier of armor would likely be strong enough to prevent a soldier from dying. The next noteworthy mission was a base defense. This one was also against snakemen. However, instead of a battleship invading the base, they came in a mothership. This ship had 10 more enemies than the battleship, and 3 commanders on board. That last bit is of value to us, as they are also vulnerable to psi attacks, which meant that this first turn was extremely one-sided. Not only did I mind control enough aliens to kill over half of the incoming force on this turn, I was able to keep one of the commanders alive. This would likely be valuable later for research. The following missions against some more advanced craft were about the same as before. That is, until a new race referred to as Snake Man Colony started appearing. This race allowed for chrysalids to join with the standard infantry on any vessel. And while that still wasn't a huge deal, as Snake Man and Chrysalid were both weak to mind control attacks, this did make the missions take longer. Next up, the Super Soldier's tech was completed. This allowed for the construction of a new base facility, and once completed, a new Super Soldier modification. This facility would take close to a month to complete, so we'll get to the new Super Soldier enhancement later. This was followed by another Snake Man terror mission. This mission was just as one-sided as the previous, and this one was so one-sided that not a single civilian died. I should note that all of the civilians on the map managed to spawn inside of this watchtower above our craft, so this was partially a feat of luck. The last few missions of the month were against Ethereals, and these were somewhat problematic. The Ethereals are still fully capable of mind-controlling the lower psi soldiers, however this extended it to the soldiers with mid-70s psi strength. We had one such mission where one of these mind control attacks almost got some people killed, and this served as yet another reminder of how dangerous these aliens were. We did, however, have a new toy to play with, that being the Power Sword. Power weapons had been available for a little while now as a research project. I simply hadn't worried about them since at the time that they had appeared, it was quite an expensive project. This was the research that I had started after Super Soldiers, and it didn't take very long to complete. These swords did a ton of damage due to the damage calculations involved. The base damage of the weapon is calculated off of a number of the soldier's stats. The power swords are primarily based off the soldier's strength, this value being multiplied by 160%. Not only is that a large modifier, this includes any stat bonuses from armor, and the power suit nearly doubles a soldier's strength. When everything has been calculated, this weapon's base damage lies around 200 for our current soldiers. Not only is this enough to kill most aliens in the game, this weapon can be used to breach UFO hulls. This is extremely useful, and would have been an option since the days of plain power armor. While I may have missed out on this for most of my run, this may be of use to some of you watching. That was it for the month, and I maintained a high positive score due to the many cargo ship missions. The second half of our fresh soldiers were also psi-trained now, and I would be giving them implants when available. After the first 2 missions of April, construction on the Biological Alteration Center was completed. This is the facility that allows me to upgrade our soldiers into super soldiers. These upgrades in Reavers Harmony Megamod completely change the type of soldier you are working with, giving them different stat caps for training and experience gain. I was initially unaware of this, and was only worrying about upgrading soldiers who had already maxed out their stats. However, you not only get the stat buffs listed here, your soldiers can also train to new maximums even higher than these buffs. The stats that require direct training, such as firing or throwing accuracy, only went up by 10 here, so the immediate stat gains would have put a lot of our soldiers to the new cap. The secondary stats, however, went up by a significant amount. Of the 4, time units and health are the 2 that are the most relevant to us. Time units now cap out at 100 and health at 90. This is up from 90 and 60 respectively. The reason health is such a big deal is that it will allow the super soldiers to survive one hit from the advanced heavy plasma guns that have been so problematic to this point. I, however, did not realize this at the moment of unlocking the upgrade option. I had no idea if these soldiers were just receiving a minor stat boost, or the complete conversion that is actually taking place. Since this operation costs $500,000 per soldier, I only gave it to those with their stats maxed out. In theory, if this was an upgrade that only boosted stats without changing the caps, you would want to do this after a soldier had maxed out their stats, as this would put you over the existing cap, rather than just reaching it faster. Now, since this was the start of the month, I had a ton of money laying around. While I could have used this on super soldiers, the engineering projects were taking longer and longer to complete. I decided that an entire second base was needed to make sure I could get through all of the endgame equipment, seeing as the stuff we were already making was taking months to produce. While this base was under construction, we completed more missions. There were a variety of craft recovered, however, none could resist our psi attacks. We started and ended each mission with mind control, as scouting the first turn with alien units was risk-free, and breaching with alien units was also nearly risk-free. Combined with the ability to see through walls, I was able to mind control whatever alien was in the perfect spot to cause the most damage, and this made most breaching trivial. Even the mighty Ethereals were not immune to mind control attacks. Should we be at a short enough range, we could fairly comfortably mind control a standard Ethereal with our Psi elites. And while they can still throw panic attacks back our way, this makes most of the current races a one-sided engagement. However, this is not even the strongest Psi equipment we have access to. After these missions, the research project on the Psionic disruptor was completed. This item, while requiring far more time units than the previous, also consumes far less psi energy and has a higher base attack strength. On top of this, under the item's hidden attributes, it is a bonus to successfully mind control an alien, whereas the previous amplifier item had a negative modifier. While it required 16 of the item used for psionic implants to make one of these disruptors, having one of these around would be game-changing. Even if I just left it on the ground for everyone to juggle over a turn, it would easily have a massive impact on the game. I queued one of these for manufacture, and we progressed with more missions. Again, these missions were about the same as before. The advanced heavy plasma netted the aliens 1, but this was over many missions. This was it for the end of the month, and like all of the recent months, we had another great score. May was the month where I got a few new goals to work towards. Not only would the new engineering base be completed a few days into the month, I discovered that there were new types of armored skeletons. These skeletons were used in the final armor sets in the game, and they were going to dictate a lot of the missions that I went on, as I either needed hundreds of sectoid bodies or a reliable source of both cyberdisks and sectopods. These new skeletons came in two forms, light and heavy. The light skeletons came from cyberdisks, something that would not be all that much of an issue in the upcoming missions. However, heavy skeletons came from sectopods. Sectopods are not a common terror unit to come across, and while there are quite a few alien bases around, I can't get away with half clearing these bases, collecting bodies, and moving back to the exit. 2x2 units do not drop items, so at this rate it would turn into luring units into the exit and killing them there. This is why the sectoid bodies matter so much. All sectoids are currently armored, and each corpse can be scavenged for an armored skeleton. 9 of these armored skeletons can be converted into one of the heavy armored skeleton. This is a high price to pay, especially when I'll be primarily using these heavy skeletons, but it is far easier to obtain. There is one other major goal I had over the next few months, and that was to produce enough psi defense armor for every single secondary base. These required a number of armored skeletons on their own, but the biggest limiter was alien power generators. These components were scavenged from alien power sources, the little Illyrium storage bits, so I need intact vessels. Over the first few missions, with only one engineering base, I was able to produce enough of these suits to equip the main base roster. This was a major boost to security, as everyone was now nearly immune to mind control. This bit of confidence led to the decision to attempt a terror ship crewed by the mixed/invasion race. This mission was mostly a stress test of our mind control attacks and the new armor. Mind control had limited effectiveness even against just the mutons on board this vessel. Mutons generally have weaker psi strength than most races. However, other than the standard ethereals, these mutons seem to be stronger than all of these other races. Attacks regularly fail against them, and while you can control most of the soldiers from other races from across the map, these mutons need to be within a reasonable distance, otherwise the attack will fail. As for the armor, it worked perfectly. Not a single meaningful psi attack was used against us. However, the race combined with the advanced plasma weapons meant that we still had to hide inside of our craft for most of the mission. We did manage to use grenades to circumvent the self-destruct feature of cyberdisks, so we got a number of light skeletons from this mission. The terror ship was escorted by a destroyer, and the recovery mission against this was nothing impressive. These aliens are still threatening, but the terror ship had more of them. After these missions, construction on the engineering base was completed. I started using this new base as an active storage base, because I was looking to make all of the new psi defense suits at this base. Most of the alien vessel components would be shipped to this new base in an effort to collect enough of them to make the psi defense armor. From here, there's a long series of missions. There are a couple of deaths from the advanced heavy plasma, and finally, there's a base assault on the home base by floaters. This assault was conducted by a mothership, but like the other standard races, there was very little that could be done about mind control attacks. This was a quick mission. This did, however, alert me to the fact that super soldiers have new stat caps. This caused me to do two things. Firstly, I gave everyone the super soldiers upgrade. If I was going to be training people to have max stats, then I might as well do it all at once. The second and more interesting thing, though, was to make training far more efficient. To revisit something I mentioned earlier, there are two types of trainable stats. The first type requires active training. However, there are also passive stats. Whenever you gain points to any of the active stats, you can gain points to any or all of the passive ones. All I was looking to train here were the passive stats, so I needed to find the most efficient way to get people a little bit of active training to any of the active stats. The best way to do this was through Psi. Not only can anyone who has been Psi trained use these devices, unlike every other skill, you do not need to succeed in your attack to gain skill. This allowed me to take 20 of the Fear Projector devices and give everyone on the craft a chance to use it turn 1. While this wasn't going to be the highest possible stat gains, at least without many turns of waiting, this gave everyone a small amount of stats on every mission. With the number of missions we've been going on, this would help tremendously with getting everybody to that 90 health we valued. I was hoping that this would allow people to survive a hit from the advanced heavy plasma, however, we were just gonna have to wait and see. I continued from here with the new strategy, and since most everyone had been given the Super Soldier transformation, the only people not in recovery were the old vets. These soldiers did need the passive stat training regardless, so this was no issue. During the 5 days of recovery, there was a terror site spawned by the Mixed Invasion race. This was the most significant mission during this time period, and it was a similar situation as a previous landed terror ship. The first few turns were spent hiding inside of the Inferno, and we were gifted a Muton with an advanced blaster launcher. This Muton could not only scout the map, it also did a meaningful amount of damage to the rest of the aliens we were up against, unlike almost every other weapon in our arsenal. This was what we needed to get through the mission without abandoning it, so slight mistakes aside, this wasn't bad. That was it for the month, and yet again, I received a sensational score. The first few days of June were spent completing more loot collection missions. Things such as psi emitters and powered skeletons were going to be of great use to us in finally beating the aliens. In addition, I made a further 3 psi disruptors from the now quite large stockpile of psi emitters. These would be useful against the mixed/invasion class of aliens that we were now seeing with progressively greater frequency. Even after these psi disruptors, I had a number of emitters lying around, so I transferred these off to the home base. These would be useful in advanced implantation, a tech that I had completed following the psi disruptor. This allowed for our soldiers to be given further psi strength buffs. However, it was at the cost of more implants. It was far less cost effective than the first round, only giving +5 psi strength per item, but it would be quite valuable for those soldiers who really needed it. With these implants, I tried 2 things. First, I took a soldier like BR who had great stats aside from psi strength, and gave them all implants to make sure that they had a minimum psi strength of 70. I would need to do more work in the future, but for now, the psi defense armor would keep our soldiers' psi strength high. The second thing I attempted was to give our soldiers who already had max psi strength additional strength. Due to the exponential power of psi attacks, I figured that even a small buff would dramatically improve our soldiers' effectiveness against the aliens. However, these implants do not improve psi strength above 90. While this would have been useful, it also has a high chance to be game-breaking, so I wasn't unhappy about it. With these new tools, I continued with missions. The Psi Disruptor is a great item, as it gives you a small buff to your mind control attacks. This allows for soldiers to quite easily mind control the mutons from the Mixed Invasion race. While stronger than the standard mutons, they are still the weakest link in the chain, and with the health and extreme resistances they had, they were all but indestructible against the aliens' own weapons. In the midst of this, I had been working on various research prerequisites for the final tier of aircraft. These are referred to as flagships, and are in theory strong enough to take on any alien vessel. The techs themselves would take about 2 months or so to complete at our current research base, so this was my final research goal before making it to Sidonia. Instead of these flagships, my next goal became the final tier of armor. This tech would require a month on its own, however, in this time I was going to collect more materials. One of the requirements for the previous technologies was the advanced transport craft, and I decided that I may want one of these for the more dangerous missions. Returning to the armor, there are 2 new suits of armor coming up, the Assassin and the Paladin armor. These armor suits require a lot more components than we've seen before, however, there are 2 new ones. The Assassin armor requires light power skeletons, and the Paladin armor requires heavy. I mentioned before that you can spend plain powered skeletons to get the advanced ones. This is not viable in our current state. The Paladin armor is going to be used more than the Assassin armor, and this armor set requires 2 heavy skeletons. We will need 18 plain skeletons per suit of armor. This is more ridiculous than digging up sectopods, so I'll be ignoring this solution for the most part from here on out. Now, I've been aiming for about 50 soldiers on base. The Assassin armor has worse psi buffs and worse psi vision than the psi attack armor, so I will be leaving a number of these 50 soldiers in psi attack armor for the foreseeable future. The other soldiers, however, are going to need new suits. I'm looking for the majority of them to be wearing paladin suits, something like 25 to 30. With those numbers, we are going to need to hunt down at least 50 sectopods. This was a concern, as I had yet to actually recover a single sectopod corpse. I spent some time trying to work out what I was going to do about this, and I had one idea. There are alien bases and outposts dotted all over the globe right now. There is an ethereal outpost and base, so I figured there must be some way to get renewable sectopods. There is no penalty to leaving an outpost early, so there is no risk there. However, normally you can just kill an alien and move its corpse to a lift. As we've established, sectopods are a 2x2 unit, so I can't just move an item into a lift with them. Luring one would be far too dangerous, however, I did just make 3 more psi disruptors. I decided to go in and try and mind control a sectopod, because while I couldn't bring the dead body to the lift, I just might be able to bring the live one. This was it. I had my solution. This wasn't particularly fast, but it was renewable. I spent a while going through these missions. However, I started getting less and less lucky. After about 2 hours of working through these outposts, with the occasional mission in between, I made a discovery. Destroying this component inside this particular room in the alien base destroys it. While this isn't great long-term, there is still an ethereal base, and I did just summarize 2 hours in less than 2 paragraphs, so I wasn't particularly mad in the moment. I got lucky during the rest of this month, as a couple of plain ethereal terror ships would appear. The first one landed in a forest, and since mind control is somewhat effective against these aliens, it wasn't all that bad. The second one, however, spawned an actual terror site. This was a night mission, and I expected rooting ethereals out of buildings to be far more of a struggle than it was. Mind control reigned supreme, and the mission was fairly comfortable. This was the last ethereal contact for the month. However, it wasn't the last mission I did. You'll recall that there is a race called Snake Man Colony, and it had been appearing and founding bases. I decided that I was going to take a look at one of these bases before the month ended. The entire facility was made of alien habitat, and there were a fair number of chrysalids. This, however, wasn't even the most interesting part. There was a boss enemy in the middle of the room, the Snake Man Queen. While this would have been terrifying near the start of the game, the first thing I tried was mind controlling the Queen, and it worked. From here, the rest of the mission was smooth. Every enemy was susceptible to mind control, so anything that could be a threat, we turned to our side. I kept the Queen alive for further research, and made quick work of the rest of the Snake Men. This was a cool mission, even if I was overpowered for it. Finally for the month, the Tempest Advanced Transport Craft was completed. I queued some equipment for it and shipped it off to the home base. This nearly doubled our active soldiers per mission, taking us from 16 to 26. While we hadn't needed this much manpower thus far, I now had the option to take on a lot of the more dangerous bases, in addition to having the option to train more soldiers at once. With another sensational score, I moved on to July. After a short period, the Tempest equipment was completed. I had a few options when choosing what I wanted to equip this craft with. I had enjoyed using the Inferno as a transport since I could simply outrun all of the alien craft we encountered, and after inspecting the stats, I realized that I had the modules available to do the same thing with the Tempest speed. The fastest alien crafts I had seen thus far had a top speed of 5,300, and given the right selection of modules, I could boost this craft to 5,400. This required an ambush module and 2 tier 3 thrusters. With the final medium slot, I gave the craft a plasma autocannon. I could have used a third thruster, but I didn't expect that it would matter. If something was going to catch this transport, then it'd likely be much faster than us. As for the battlescape map of the craft, it had similar versatility to the Inferno, just with a larger interior. There were the same side doors as before, one extra door on the rear, and a staircase leading to the roof. I'd mostly be using the same strategies before, but it was nice to have the extra space inside to maneuver. I continued with missions while waiting for the advanced armor tech to complete. However, gameplay started to slow down significantly. I had 10 more soldiers to manage on every mission, and I was really feeling it in the mission times. Since I was only working on most of these missions to collect items for the advanced armor sets, this was a problem, and it was seeming as though having less soldiers would be more efficient. After just a few missions, the tech for the integrated armor was completed. These were the same armor suits as before, however, the manufacturing times were not something that I had taken into account until now. I was going to need over a day to make one of any of these suits, and since I needed about 30 of them for the home base now, that was over a month and a half of engineering time to wait through. While we were also short on a select few materials, this was going to become a waiting game. This paired fairly well with the upcoming flagship technology, as it was also going to take about 2 whole months to complete. At some point, I would need to sit down and only play the required missions while waiting for these to complete, but we still had plenty more manufacturing and research to do. Manufacturing was a fairly simple deal. We needed many more of the support items since we now had a craft size of 26. Things like medkits and the heavy laser secondary weapons were needed, so I spent most of the month working on these. As for research, there were a small number of items that I needed to finish research on. The first of these items were also the last of the alien gear. Both the advanced alien grenade and standard blaster launcher were both items I'd yet to research, alongside the advanced blaster bomb. I did a couple of other small projects, such as various corpses, but these would have the largest impact on gameplay. With my research and engineering tasks in order, I got ready to tackle the select few resources that we needed for the final batch of armor. There were a couple of alien items that we only needed 1 craft worth of material for, so I wouldn't worry about those. However, alien power generators continued to be an issue. These had been a problem for a while now, and I'd been working on it in the background trying to get psionic defense armor, but the limiting component was still power generators. This meant that I needed as many power generators as I could get my hands on. I did a series of landed cargo and supply ships, but these only yielded 15 and 30 generators respectively. Each suit of paladin armor needed 12 generators, and I was not looking forwards to doing a dozen of each of these mission types. Each would take around 40 minutes to an hour to complete, and I'd already done far more of these missions than I'd originally expected. This was the point where I realized that I had other options. These supplying cargo ships were supplying various alien bases. These alien bases would yield a large number of components, similar to any of their vessels, so I decided to take out one of these bases and see what it gave. I chose to assault a Snake Man base. While these were home to chrysalids, these were just as vulnerable to mind control as the rest of the early aliens. This left the mission start quite similar to the Ethereal Outpost. While the soldiers did start in split positions, we had almost double the number of soldiers, so we were in no danger. I started this mission the same as I do any other dangerous mission, hiding in our spawn and causing as much damage as possible with mind control. Since every other alien on this base was vulnerable to mind control attacks, I was able to push the aliens to the point of panic. This did take a few turns, but after this point, I was able to quickly sweep across the base and mop up anything we had not yet gotten. This was fairly easy, and finally gave me a reason to have more than 16 soldiers on a mission. The base didn't have any alien power source items, the raw materials we had been salvaging into power generators. However, it did give a large number of alien repositories. You get these repository items from a few different sources, such as the supply ships from earlier, but never in a meaningful amount. This alien base gave a ton of these repositories, around 20 of each of the 3 colors. Each color, when salvaged, gives a variety of items, and we are interested in the yellow variety. In addition to some other items, the yellow repository gives 3 power generators. Getting 60 of these from a single mission of comparable length to a supply ship is a great trade-off, so while there are a limited number of these bases on the map, we will be able to collect enough materials for the new armor. Since we'd established that this was a solid solution, I launched a mission to a second base. This one was a muton base, so while I was still able to wreak havoc from spawn, the mutons were never driven to the point of panicking. I did get the opportunity to capture some ethereal commanders here. One of my spawns was directly adjacent to the command center of the base, and I was able to use the Psionic Disruptor's stun attack to knock out 2 of the commanders on base. This was a great find, and it would allow me to skip doing an ethereal base that I noted earlier. After the first phase where I caused as much damage as possible, I mobilized the soldiers in the lower left lift. These soldiers were closer to a corner, so it would be easier to shift the front lines to only one manageable direction. This team, with the help of some muton scouts, was able to sweep across to the middle of the base, and once they came into contact with a second lift, I deployed the soldiers from this lift as well to make sure that the rest of the aliens were dealt with swiftly. This was another relatively easy mission, and gave us enough power generators to finally make the paladin armor that we were looking for. This wasn't the end of the month, but I no longer needed to collect materials from every single vessel that I saw. I let a bit of time pass and a few projects were completed. Of note, the Doom laser cannon tech was completed. This is an upgrade to the standard laser cannon that we've been using. Like all of the previous advanced weapons, this would be great to deploy on every mission, however it had a high cost of manufacturing. Of all of these weapons though, it was the one that had the highest chance of being used. The advanced heavy plasma was the most frequent of the aliens' weapons, and the ammunition requires some expensive but frequent materials. Returning to the geoscape, our research advancements were halted by not one, but two back-to-back terror missions. Both of these were crewed by the mixed invasion race, and luckily, both were during the day. Since all of the recent missions had been conducted by advanced vessels, I could not afford to attempt these missions without heavy use of mind control. This meant that most of each mission was spent inside of the Tempest, spotting and occasionally shooting at aliens. This was just as effective as it had always been, but I was looking forward to being able to deploy real soldiers instead of mind-controlled mutons. These missions where I merely optimized use of mind control against the aliens were not the most engaging. At the end of the month, I was finally able to start manufacturing paladin armor suits. All of the extra support equipment that we needed for the team was completed, and the second engineering base had already been working on supplying the support bases with equipment. We had a few more techs left to research, but I will be starting the flagship project soon as well. To briefly return to the subject of engineering, I was informed that the human usable mind probe was an extremely valuable item to manufacture and sell. It requires less components than you receive from salvaging an alien mind probe, sells for far more, and can be crafted in a fairly short time period. For reference, I'd been making and selling human usable plasma weapons prior to this. This on-screen comparison shows how much better the mind probe is. With yet another sensational score, I moved on to August. This month was the point where I realized that we needed many more months worth of research and manufacturing to get the items needed for Sidonia. Looking at the manufacturing alone, it would likely take over 6 months worth of time to make all the items we needed. This was cut in half due to the 2 bases we had, but this still wasn't great time. In addition, there were a couple of techs prior to gaining access to the Sidonia mission that we needed to research. Both of these techs were going to take a similarly long time compared to the flagship stages, so this was something that I would need to account for. I started to wonder at this point if I actually needed to build a flagship, as I didn't need it for combat by this point, and would only really use it for the transport-oriented flagship to get 6 extra bodies in the field. While contemplating this, a new alien infiltration mission spawned. This infiltration mission was the first I'd seen, and while this is something that would normally be quite odd, I was still putting off all of the research from the Sidonia tech chain. In a lot of mods, researching these techs can spawn or enable various alien missions, so it's not unreasonable that this prevented the mission from spawning up until this point. Between missions where we shot down craft associated with the infiltration mission, research on the final endgame weapon in Harmony was completed. That weapon is the Calamity launcher. This weapon is both a blaster launcher and a small launcher. There are a few types of both guided missiles and grenades, and you can load both of these into the weapon at the same time. This is a powerful weapon, however, it required 8 advanced fusion launchers per item. You'll be lucky to see 3 of these launchers in a mission, so they would not be widely used. At the moment of research, we had enough for 4 Calamity launchers, and I'd put these to use once manufacturing was completed. The next mission of interest was a base defense. This was against a race known as Mixed Invasion. Now, I've mentioned this race 7 times before. However, it should be noted that there are apparently 2 versions of this race. I described the Muton variant earlier. However, this second version swaps mutons for sectoids, swaps cyberdiscs for sectopods, and removes the celatids. This is an armor-heavy and psi-heavy variant of the race. However, we were far enough into the endgame to where we were relatively safe. This base defense went about the same as all did at this point. We mind-controlled a few of the aliens with blaster launchers, fired the blaster launchers, and mopped up whatever survived. There was a reason for concern, as the soldiers in assassin armor were vulnerable to psi attacks, but overall this mission was fine. Returning to the geoscape, it had become clear that there were 3 ongoing infiltration missions. This was a huge shift, and something that I wasn't interested in contending with. These missions were not something that can be stopped. Once it starts, the aliens will eventually turn the country. I've always been under the impression that shooting down the alien craft can delay the mission, but I wasn't going to lose the game for a while. I decided that I was going to enter the final phase of gameplay here. From this point forward, I was only going to do the missions that were absolutely necessary. This would generally include terror missions and base defense missions, however it could extend to assaults on alien outposts for the sake of points. With this new plan, I began to progress faster. There were 2 terror missions again at the end of this month, both against the first mixed invasion variant, and both were decisive. We got manufacturing done during this period as well, however, since all of our projects were taking months to complete, we still needed more time. With a decent score, we moved on to September. I spent a lot of time this month dismissing pop-ups. There were an impressive number of cargo ship missions, though with a globe covered in outposts, this was to be expected. Every pop-up dismissed was upwards of an hour saved. For reference, every month from this point forwards took no more than a single 2-hour episode to complete, as opposed to the between 3 to 5 episodes for the previous months. Moving at this speed, the new armor suits were completed in no time. I started working on the various endgame weapons we need for Sidonia, and returned to waiting. This month had another 2 terror missions, and while the first was fine, we were forced to abandon the second. The second mission was against the new variant of the mixed invasion crew, and the lower psi strength granted by the assassin armor proved to be problematic. I now had 2 immediate goals. I did need a positive score at the end of the month, and would have to do something about that abandoned terror mission. However, psi had also proved to be a real problem. Psi was the easiest fix. A while back, we had unlocked the ability to grant people psi implants up to 6 additional times. This allowed us to give any soldier a base psi strength of 90, and some of these soldiers needed it. I went through every one of our soldiers and started pushing their psi strengths up. This process would take the rest of the month, as between each implant a soldier would need 3 or so days to recover. I made sure that every soldier on base had a psi strength of 90 or higher with armor buffs included. While this wasn't certain to lead to immunity, the soldiers in psi attack armor were limited to 90 psi strength, so 90 would have to be good enough. Once these enhancements were completed, I moved on to ensuring that we had a positive score for the month. This involved raiding a few of the alien outposts dotted along the globe. We outnumbered the defenders on these missions, so none were difficult, but this one blaster launcher shot was noteworthy. This closed out the month, and we did manage a positive score, even if it was far less impressive than before. The second phase of the flagship tech was completed during the beginning of October, and since I wasn't certain I wanted to spend the extra 2 months manufacturing one, I instead pivoted to researching the Ethereal Commander and accompanying Sidonia mission techs. In addition, we completed the Calamity launcher and ammo. We will be able to test these out in the inevitable monthly terror missions. These terror missions came shortly after, and the launcher served us quite well. We didn't use the guided rocket function during any of these missions, as this was something that we were already familiar with. The smaller bombs, on the other hand, I did make sure to test. These were great. The clip size in each weapon was 3, and the blast was both powerful and contained. This was likely the case for all of the other bomb variants as well, however, I didn't see us needing anything other than the raw offense at this stage in the game. Smoke and stun are neat ideas for these smaller explosives, but there were already handheld grenade variants for both of these. The value of the launcher was the lower time unit costs, and this was the most useful and direct danger. These terror missions netted somewhere between 4,000 to 5,000 points, and including the points gained from research projects, I let the month tick over to see what our score was. This slightly negative score is manageable, however we can't afford too many of these months. It appeared as though I would need over 8,000 points to ensure a positive score for the month, so I took this new knowledge into November. This month started out with a base defense. This was not a threat, however there was a noteworthy detail. This was a standard craft. Every alien vessel at this point in the game, so long as it was a part of a mission that had recently spawned, was advanced. There was simply no way that this mothership was naturally spawned, and seeing as I had researched techs for Sidonia in the previous month, this was likely a result of that. This was against the second mixed invasion race, so it would be manageable in the early game so long as you had psi resistance. Luckily for us, we were no longer in the early game. Next up, research was completed on the Sidonia tech chain. There was one further tech we could research here, and this tech would give us knowledge of what we could expect on Sidonia. This required interrogating another ethereal liaison, so I stopped by one of the local outposts to pick one up. The interrogation didn't take long, however, the following tech would take some time, so we had to do the 2 terror missions first. Both of these missions were just as one-sided as normal. After these missions, the manufacturing projects on both the Scourge and Doom weapons were completed. I'll note here that Reavers Harmony Megamod had received an update midway through the series. The ammo for the Scourge launcher now only cost 1 of the stellatid glands. We could make a fair amount of ammo for this item now, even if widespread use was still impossible. The final manufacturing that we needed to complete was on the Fate Plasma Pistol. We only needed a couple of these items, so we'd be ready for the final mission within a few days. In the same time period, that final research project was completed. This gave us a paragraph of info, most noteworthy of which was the composition of the aliens on Sidonia. This would be a collection of elite aliens, and we'd see everything outside of the mutons and snakemen across the 2 layers. This was an interesting discovery. The primary use of the plasma shotgun so far had been snakemen and mutons, so we'd likely get less use out of the Scourge than I had initially anticipated. With this knowledge and a complete stock of weapons, I started designing 4 different loadouts for Sidonia. Firstly, I should note the armor composition of the team. We were going to have 8 suits of psi attack armor, 5 assassin suits, and 13 paladin armor suits. These numbers were entirely dictated by the number of weapons that I had manufactured to this point. Firstly, I had the 8 psi attack suits due to the fact that I had 8 psi disruptors. These were the 8 soldiers in psi attack armor for the final mission, and each of them would be getting this loadout. I was giving every single soldier the Fate pistol and a medikit. However, everything else was based off the weight capacity of each armor suit. Since all of the endgame weapons have extremely high weight requirements, I was only able to give these soldiers the base plasma shotgun and power sword. In addition to these items, I gave them a motion scanner. While it was true that the motion scanner was mostly obsolete, some of the terror aliens did not show up under psi vision. If these soldiers were going to be using that vision for scouting, I figured I might as well have them take the scanner for edge cases. Next up, we had the assassin armor. This suit was dedicated to using the Calamity launcher, and as you may have guessed, I'd managed to make a 5th launcher. All of these new weapons weighed quite a bit, so even though our soldiers had over 100 strength, each soldier could only ever afford to carry 1. This is including the Fate pistol, so every soldier always had a decent backup, but I'd have liked to be able to carry more ammo. Finally, we have the paladin armor. These soldiers had 2 different weapon options. They would either get the Doom laser or the Scourge blaster. Both of these weapons were great on their own, however I did lean towards having more of the Scourge than the Doom. The assassin armor already had a heavy weapon, so we'd want to ensure that we had a well-rounded force. You'll notice in both of these loadouts that each soldier does have an alternative weapon from the previous age of tech. The Doom laser has the plasma shotgun, and the Scourge the heavy laser. The paladin armor was strong enough to carry this extra weapon, and this was a comfort going into the mission. After setting up these loadouts, I decided that I wasn't going to wait another 2 months for the flagship tech. Not only could I start the mission now, I could avoid letting November end, and this was a good enough reason for me. So, after one final check, I started the Sidonia mission. Now, you'll notice something different here. Since we're in space, the soldiers now have the ability to carry more items. This was both great and annoying. I already had a neat loadout set up, however, the random collection of spare items on the craft was not what I would have brought ahead of time if I'd known this was going to happen. This is something that I likely neglected to read somewhere, but I was already on Sidonia. I somewhat haphazardly gave our soldiers extra equipment. Initially, I started by swapping the heavy laser for the Doom laser. I also started giving the Scourge blasters to the psi attack suits, and ensuring that everyone had a power sword. After this point, though, I just started filling up every empty space in the paladin armor suits with spare items, as I'd run out of the advanced gear. I made use of everything except for a few plasma shotguns and heavy lasers, so I started the mission. The first thing I noticed was that the map was huge. This was an impressive scale, and a whole host of new enemies. As per instructed by the briefing, I took a look around for a pyramid with a large door in it, and found it quite close to the craft. This was lucky, as should I had to go searching the entire map for this pyramid, I'd likely have decided to just clear the map. Clearing this map would have been a huge mistake, as there are just too many aliens inside of these maze-like buildings to get through. As for the aliens, they were similar to the ones from before, but with some major buffs, including psi resistance. The Reapers were durable enough to survive a single shot from the small bomb from the Calamity launcher. Both the sectoids and cyberdisks had over 100 armor, and there were also floaters. Of the infantry, there were two primary variants: soldiers and psi users. Both the sectoids and floaters had variants that made use of psi powers, including the psi stun attacks, and these were spread out around the map. None of these were ever close enough to cause damage, however, that didn't stop them from trying. The easiest way to determine if an infantry unit had access to psi powers was by their weapon. Anything less than a heavy plasma had access to psi. This dictated a few of the choices over the first turns, however, since no one ever got hit by a successful attack, I mostly kept to the transport. I was able to cause the damage that I needed from within our indestructible box, and didn't move out until the coast was clear. After ensuring that the inside of the access lift was clear, I decided to make a break for the lift. Most of our soldiers were able to run straight from the craft to the lift, and with that, we descended into the complex. This was where things got interesting. Not only were we stripped of our indestructible box, there was only one lift, meaning that a number of soldiers were placed in immediate danger. This was somewhat mitigated by use of mind control, however, I quickly discovered a new threat. That sectopod was staring straight at the elevator I needed these soldiers to escape to, and after using a mind probe, I discerned that it had one shot left. I figured that our soldiers were likely fine to take one hit from their front armor, especially if it was only one, and started moving them up. While this wasn't optimal, this at least confirmed what I had already expected. Even the psi attack armor could take a hit from these sectopods, so while the sectopods may be durable, so were we. After this escape, I decided to try out the guided missile provided by the Calamity launcher. This functioned the same as the standard blaster launcher, however, I wasn't sure how durable the sectopod was. This is the path I sent the missile on, and while there's always a chance for the missile to deviate from the path based on the soldier's accuracy, I figured the worst case scenario was that the missile would get caught in the windows. It goes without saying that this was a problem. I was using that wall, and now I had to deal with an elite Celatid. The non-elite versions of Celatids had issues dealing damage through armor, as they needed to strip away all of it before doing any damage. I decided that Rattle here and Psi armor could probably take the damage. The Psi suit soldiers were mostly backline support units anyway, so it wouldn't be an issue not having any front armor. And had the Celatid missed a single shot, this would have been fine. The plasma pistol did negligible damage to the Celatid here, as it started with 270 health, so I needed a different solution. The solution was the power sword. This made clearing out the room quite easy, and allowed for a safe position for the soldiers with the flying armor suits. Now, there was another thing that this missile had opened up, and that was the floor. The soldiers on the far side of the lift could now see the sectopod, and it could see them back. Even if we were likely to survive, I wasn't going to wait around and find out, so I moved one of the Doom lasers into position and fired. That did in fact one-shot the sectopod. Not only does it take 2.4x damage from this thing, its armor value is reduced to 40%. This meant that the Doom Laser could consistently one-shot the sectopods, and just about any alien with high armor and average health. With that problem solved, I ended the turn. I had made sure to drop weapons to prevent further damage from panic attacks. There was a comparable barrage of psi attacks to the surface, and while a few did succeed, they only made soldiers panic. The next turn was spent rooting out a few of the nearby aliens using the power of psi, and the turn after, I finally mobilized. At this point, I discovered something new. Not only were the walls made out of paper, the dirt was too. This quite rapidly developed into a strategy of assassin-armored soldiers carving paths between rooms using the power sword, and dealing with the ethereals hiding upstairs. This was so effective that by the time the paladin suits made it halfway through the lower floor, the assassin suits had crossed the map. This map was a long corridor, and upon opening up a path on the 3rd story of the far end of the map, Cookie Shoot saw this. That was it. This mission was a little bit easier than expected, though if I'd been forced to spend more time on the surface, the complex below would have been a much harder ordeal. The unknown alien variants really did add to this final mission, even if Psi worked against them all the same. Here are the final stats. A lot of these numbers here are as I expected, and the longest surviving soldier was in fact BR. No one else had survived since that first January. I also took a trip to the memorial to go through some past events. This is stuff you've all just seen, but it'd been about 100 hours since I started playing, so this was fun to revisit at the time. Now, before I end the video, I should give an update on the channel and everything surrounding it. First off, people keep asking when I'm going to play XCOM Apocalypse. I'm currently waiting for the OpenAPOC project to be completed. OpenAPOC does not currently have all of the content from the original game, however, once it does, Apocalypse will become my top priority. Next up, I have a small Discord server, and this is where I've moved the name list. If you want your name to show up on one of these soldiers in the videos, you can join off the link in the description. You can run a command on my Discord bot and get added to the list. This is likely going to reset at the time of releasing this video, so go ahead and join. You'll be one of the few who are showcased in the next video. Finally, the mod vote is live. I'm going to leave this running for about a week after posting this video. This is under my YouTube community section, and I'll make sure to link it in the description. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you whenever I post next.